We've spent all offseason talking about the wide receivers the Bears are going to put around Justin Fields. And we've been left maybe a little bit disappointed in that regard. But the team, the coaching staff, they say they're really confident in the guys that they have and think everything is still going to come together as well as they expect.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. On the show today, we'll hear from offensive coordinator Luke Getsy talking about, sort of the state of this Bears wide receiving core and why they do feel good and are confident about the players they have on the roster right now, specifically with Justin Fields and how they sort of see that development happening together. We'll hear about some of Fields' growth this offseason and where a lot of this confidence in him is coming from and how that all sort of meshes together for this offensive plan. And then we need to wrap up a little bit separately with the story that came out yesterday in the Players Tribune from former Bears running back Tarik Cohen, where he opened up about a lot of hardships going on in his life over the last couple of years, and of course during his recovery from the knee injury that led to the Bears ultimately releasing him, and he's still a free agent at this point. But it's really kind of heartbreaking, but also enlightening toward what the last year and a half or 2 years have been like for the Bears running back and kind of how things derailed a bit from there. But let's start with this Bears offense right now, the players still on this roster, right? We've been sort of wringing our hands all offseason about this wide receiver position and how, of course, when you're building around a young quarterback, you want to have quality, consistent, proven wide receivers, weapons. I mean, you want everything around the quarterback to be as good as possible. But when you looked at what the Bears had and didn't have and all of the free agents, the turnover at wide receiver, it was a massive hole that the Bears plugged with some lesser proven options across the board. Opted not to, of course, draft one in the second round, used a third-round pick on Velus Jones. You got Byron Pringle. You got Equanimeous St. Brown. They did also bring in David Moore sort of later on in this process, and a lot to like about Darnell Mooney. This Bears coaching staff doesn't seem to lack any confidence in that group. Not that they're not still at least looking around and considering what their options might be. They're always open to adding more players, but offensive coordinator Luke Getsy sees sort of the coaching staff's work and the offensive system as a whole as being a big driving factor in how those receivers ultimately plan out.
When it comes to the wide receiver core, do you get it that Bears fans are a little nervous about the lack of a Allen Robinson, Devontae Adams type of proven, multi-year proven number one receiver in this group?
Yeah, I mean, that's, fans will, of course, everybody wants Devontae Adams. Who wouldn't want Devontae Adams, right? That's part of it, but Devontae wasn't Devontae until he became Devontae, right? And so I think the system will enable some of these guys to play at their potential. And so we'll see what we can do. We'll give them an opportunity to show them what they got.
I think a lot of the questions with the wide receivers, it's not that they're not good or anybody wants to dog them. It's the lack of playing and starting experience. And I'm wondering, in the need to develop Justin, how concerned are you that not having that consistency around him can limit his growth?
Well, I think we're in a situation where it's more like my experiences are when you're new to a quarterback rather than how much ball you've played in this league. And I think we have enough guys on this team that have played a lot of ball in the league. I think it's just that experience of playing with the quarterback and, teaching him, the body languages that the signals you want to send to him when you're ready to make a break. And so all that stuff, you can see that happening every single day, how much more comfortable these guys are getting and how much more comfortable Justin is getting with those guys. So I'm excited. It's been getting better every single day. I'm excited to see where these guys can go.
So Luke Getsy seemingly more interested in this idea of the receiver's experience with the quarterback than overall their, production and experience in the NFL. And he's not pretending that the Bears have some stellar, deep, perfect wide receiving core that couldn't use any level of improvement or anything like that. No, but I think he looks towards, first of all, a lot of confidence in the system. I was scratching my head on that a little bit where he says, the system will help them play better up to their potential and show what they can do. And I don't know how much I fully buy that at this point, in the sense that, certainly Green Bay's offense under Luke Getsy and Matt LaFleur, it did help Davante Adams, right? That is true. Luke Getsy was the one who was the wide receivers coach for Davante Adams a lot of that for his early years, and did help develop Davante Adams into becoming who Davante Adams is. But it wasn't as though it necessarily turned the rest of their wide receivers into anything, above and beyond. Of course, Marquez Valdez-Scantling was kind of the bigger one for as far as free agency this offseason. Had but his best season in Green Bay was just under 700 yards and 6 touchdowns on, 35-ish catches across, So I don't know that was the system fully showing what Marquez Valdez-Scantling can do, because part of the expectation is maybe he comes to Kansas City where he is now and has a bigger season in maybe a bigger role and just a better opportunity for him, because they won't have Davante Adams taking so many of the targets. Won't even have Tarik Hill taking the lion's share of the targets. So he could have a bigger season outside of Green Bay, or Equanimeous St. Brown, who the Bears signed from Green Bay. Had his rookie season, I think, his rookie season, he had his most catches and yards and targets of any of his years, and kind of dropped off and vanished from there as a guy like Valdez-Scantling grew into a bigger role, and they brought in other younger players at that position to try and get different bodies in there to find more weapons for Aaron Rodgers. So yes, I could see Chicago being a bigger opportunity for Byron Pringle maybe than he was getting in Kansas City, and that could perhaps lead to more production from him. It could be a bigger role for Equanimeous St. Brown than he had in Green Bay and lead to more catches for him. But is that the system and the scheme? Are they going to be running certain route concepts that are just going to make them better wide receivers? I guess I'm not totally sold just yet that they're going to be, that this coaching staff and this scheme is going to be so wide receiver friendly. It could be quarterback friendly, but is it going to make all the wide receivers instantly way better than they've been throughout their careers? I'm a little bit skeptical. I think we can see enough of a step forward from Pringle, maybe another little step forward from Darnell Mooney, and maybe Velus Jones can be a decent number 3, where you could still piece together something that resembles a receiving core that is functioning, even if it's on the lower end of the spectrum. I don't think they're going to be desperately hopeless at wide receiver, but I'm skeptical that the system and the experience with Justin Fields is going to purely open them up to being something great. I think it's going to take a lot more time, and it's not going to be something that's just smooth and productive right away in week 1. So I think patience is going to be important there. Although we are seeing and hearing about good progress from Justin Fields in his development this offseason. We'll check in on what the coaching staff is seeing, particularly in some of the ways that we won't get to see as much from the outside, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears, and all episodes of Locked On Bears, are powered by our friends at Built Bar, the makers of the world's best tasting protein bars. You can tell it's hot outside right now, really all across the Midwest, so it's suns out, guns out on the podcast today. And, like to get those guns going at the gym, get some protein afterward, and our friends at Built Bar have the world's best tasting protein bars ever made. I like them as just like a dessert or a sweet treat at any point in the day. Leaves you full, but you also get that sweet tooth satisfied as well. Because every Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate. They're soft, they're easy to chew, but they're also low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. I'm telling you, it sounds too good to be true, but once you taste them, you will believe it. Head on over to Built.com, enter in our promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next purchase. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. So much of how those wide receivers perform and how this Bears offense performs and how the team as a whole does this season will be dependent on and perhaps a reflection of Justin Fields and the types of progress he makes this season. It's obvious. I mean, we all know it. That is what this season and the rest of the short and potentially long-term future is all about, which is why there has been such an emphasis on wide receiver and on offensive line and trying to get the best possible group around him. And so we won't really get to see the result of that development, the fruits of some of that labor until later on. I mean, we'll get snippets at OTAs, maybe some training camp highlight videos from fans in the stands, even though I think that's against the rules, but obviously you would still do it anyway. You still see plenty of it across Twitter. And even, early on in the season, it might not all come together right. It shouldn't. I wouldn't expect it to all come together right away in week one because it is brand new receivers, some brand new offensive linemen, a brand new system for everybody to learn. But as far as how we're seeing Fields grow in the meantime, this Bears coaching staff has been impressed in some specific ways. And offensive coordinator Luke Getsy talked about how important that relationship between play caller, offensive coordinator, and quarterback will be and is to everyone involved in the process.
What have you learned about Fields in your time with him, and how is that reflected in the elements of, I don't want to say playbook, but of your scheme that you're trying to teach?
No, I've been super impressed with him. I really have. There's no one in this building that works harder than him. There's no one that cares more than him. So we're off to a great start, and he's really accepted this challenge. We're asking a lot of him to learn a lot of new things, and he's been a pleasure to work with.
How did he show you that, or how did you learn that about him, and how would you describe kind of the partnership that you two have as the person in charge of the offense and the guy who needs to make it?
No, that's extremely important. I was raised on that the play caller and the quarterback have to have a great relationship, and that's important. And we have to be on the same page always. And that's where I've really been, where I've felt like he's grown is he's communicating with me so well now, things that he's feeling, things that he sees. And so that part of it has just been tremendous for a young guy to be able to do that. And, these 3 or 4 months we've been together now, it's been a lot of fun. It's
certainly encouraging that Justin Fields is already in a position where he's confident and curious and all the right things to be able to have that type of communication with his offensive coordinator. Because I remember when Mitch Trubisky was going through this with Matt Nagy, I feel like it wasn't, and I don't remember the exact timeline on this, but if I remember correctly, it really wasn't until his second offseason with Matt Nagy and his third offseason in the NFL that we heard the coaching staff say Mitch is speaking up more at meetings and telling us more of what he wants out of the offense. And so I think comparatively, it would seem as though Justin is a little bit ahead of where Mitch was in that regard. And of course, that's only what we get to hear on the outside. And it's not to say that Mitch Trubisky was never speaking up and never involved in giving his input, but it was just the coaching. Matt Nagy made a note of it. I'm pretty sure it was Nagy's second year, Mitch's third year, but Mitch's second year in Nagy's offense, to when he really felt that confidence in the offense and in the system to be able to give more of his input and stand up a little bit more for what he wants to see as the quarterback. And the fact that Justin Fields is now in just his second season and his first 3 months of knowing this offensive coordinator and still learning the system, but being more involved in not the playbook process, but sort of the scheme process and the play calling process and the system development process, I think bodes really well for his confidence and his understanding of the offense and being able to pick things up quickly, to be able to give input, communicate, and ask the right questions, but then also just from a leadership standpoint, to be able to take ownership over that offense and to be able to really, lead the team and show that, hey, it's his thing too. It's not just yes, he's learning alongside everyone else as well, but also it's something that he is getting a command of and a grasp of and has some level of control over that I think just, sort of exudes some of that confidence that goes along with it. And I think it all sort of circles in with, Ryan Poles, the general manager, going on Chicago radio late last week. Now the timelines, I'm mixing up on that. But he was on 670 The Score and ESPN 1000. And in both interviews, he talked about how the Bears are all in on Justin Fields and how they have the organization is putting its full support behind him, just to kind of more fully dispel the already unbased speculation that somehow the team wasn't confident in him because they didn't draft wide receivers in the second round or use big money that they didn't even have on wide receivers in free agency. So I think it's all coming together in the ways that are encouraging and that you want to see at this stage in the offseason. It doesn't mean necessarily much for translating right away to wins and losses, but it is checking the important boxes, right? It's not as though like he's going above and beyond necessarily, but it's important that it's not lacking, right? If the team was still quiet about Justin Fields' growth and was still, talking about how it's day by day and learning and all this stuff and kind of not silent on it, but just less clearly enthusiastic, you could start to ask more of those questions. But I think you're at least hitting where you want to be hitting at this stage. What that actually ends up meaning, we'll see, but it would be a bigger deal if it was missing. So it's important to acknowledge that, hey, it is here and it is tracking in that direction that you want for Fields to then keep working with these receivers, get on the same page, and kind of get this offense where they want things to be. It's still going to be more of a long-term process for sure. We're not expecting humongous things in year one. It's kind of like a second rookie season for Justin Fields. Last year, more of like a redshirt type thing, but by all means, doing the things and performing the way and acting the way that the coaching staff wants him to. So a lot to be encouraged about in that regard. I kind of want to turn a little bit of a different direction here because we got to talk about the story that Tarik Cohen put out yesterday about his career. It's really fascinating, a little bit heartbreaking and enlightening. Gives us a lot more information about kind of what was going on in his life as he was away from the team that ultimately then led to his release. So we'll kind of check in on Tarik Cohen's letter to his younger self next on Locked On Bears. I highly encourage you, if you haven't read Tarik Cohen's story at the Players Tribune, take a minute out of your day and go and read it. Of course, finish listening to the Locked On Bears podcast. I guess we're gonna talk about it right now. So spoiler alert, I guess, but it's also, it's not like it's a big book or a movie, but like it is really, like I said, heartbreaking. It's difficult. It's emotional. It's revealing. It's so many different things. It's really well written and comes together nicely. It's framed as Tarik Cohen's letter to his younger self. It's him writing. It starts out, "Dear 17-year-old Tarik," and he kind of goes back up to when he kind of had to make a decision when he was 17, as far as like really trying to commit to football and making a career out of that versus maybe staying where he was with his family and spending more time with them and trying to be more of that present mentor to his brothers and be there for his mother and all the difficult things she has had to go through in raising them. And he goes on to talk about how his brother got involved with drug dealing and was shot in the head, and Tarik Cohen and was arrested, multiple times before that. And, one time Tarik Cohen, he describes going home to pay his brother's bail and get him out. But before he picked his brother up from the jail, he went to his house and knew where a large amount of cocaine would be hiding. And Tarik Cohen dumped out, like he described, like multiple full big bags of cocaine into a toilet and flushed it down the toilet, and then went and picked his brother up. And then when his brother got home, he was furious at Tarik for having flushed the drugs down the toilet because of how much money they were worth and all the dealing that brother had been involved with. So then Cohen is away with the Bears, of course, having a football season and trying to do his career as well. And then he gets a call that his brother's been shot in the head. And then, of course, we all heard, I think, last year, was it, that one of Tarik Cohen's other brothers died. He was electrocuted at a power plant. Apparently, there had been perhaps some level of intoxication involved, and he was climbing on something and then got electrocuted and died. So Cohen, has had these massive tragedies go through his life as he's been dealing with, trying to just be a successful football player. And even he posted a screenshot in this of his bank account the day before he signed his rookie contract, not the contract extension the Bears gave him, but his rookie contract. It's a Wells Fargo screenshot of his cell phone with minus $99 in his checking account. Like he was in the red. He took a screenshot of it to remember the day, the day before his $600,000 signing bonus hit. just how poor and how little money he had. And then, of course, on his rookie contract, he was sending so much of it back home, trying to be a good brother, but then talks about all the trouble his brothers were in and how like he was thinking like, should I have never gotten into football in the first place? Should I have taken a year off and gone home and been, more of a role model to them? Should I have sent more money home? What could I have done differently to protect them? I mean, it's just like these difficult things. I mean, even I think it was the day he found out his brother was shot in the head, he was about to go do an interview with E60 for a documentary about HBCUs, where he went to North Carolina A&T and that role for him. And he had to just sort of like pretend everything was fine. And he did that with his teammates in the locker room too, just sort of like had to pretend everything was fine while his family was literally being torn apart and killed back home, and how difficult that was on his mother and his whole family. And it's just like, we never know on the outside what these players are going through. I mean, at least for Tarik, he did get the big contract extension from the Bears to at least get like millions of dollars to be able to even better take care of his mother and his family, after that rookie contract yes, $600,000 and the couple million he got in a rookie contract is a lot of money. Let's not pretend it's not, but to really have that burden eased a little bit more on that big contract. And now he's taking care of his late brother's children and is paying for their college. And I think he bought them houses or has houses coming in their name, so they'll be taken care of, even as he hasn't been able to play in the last 2 seasons. He said not only did he tear his ACL, and he talked about the sort of the idea of like, oh, well, you tear an ACL, you should be able to come back to that quickly. But Tarik revealed, which I don't think we fully recognized on the outside, that he tore his ACL, his MCL, and he fractured his tibial plateau. And that's a big reason why he hasn't been able to play since. He did say, he kind of left it on more of an optimistic note at the end and said, he's feeling better about the knee. He feels like he's getting pretty close to being able to like be back to full speed. He feels like he can run and trust that knee again now. So presumably an NFL opportunity should be soon around the corner for Cohen, and you can't read the story and not come away rooting for the guy. I mean, we were rooting for the guy when he was in Chicago. He always seemed like a good leader, a great teammate, a guy who was respectful and treated the fans well and all that stuff. But like now, you really pull for Tarik Cohen and everything he's had to go through and just the mental health struggles that came with all that. I mean, it's a remarkable piece, and I wanted to take this time to really highlight that because of how revealing it was, and how we just have no idea on the outside what any of these players are going through. So when a guy like Cohen has a down year in 2019 that doesn't have an obvious injury to necessarily go with it, and we can blame the coaching staff and the offense and all those other things, there's also more going on with that behind the scenes, and it applies to so many other players that when you see a player maybe having a bad year, Robert Quinn has hinted at as much his first season in Chicago as there being more going on in the background. When he only had 2 sacks but played in 15 games, he hasn't really opened up the way Tarik Cohen just did, and he's by no means does he have to. It's not he's allowed to have privacy and should not be expected to tell us everything going on in his life that might be affecting his play on the field. Certainly, kudos, shout outs, appreciation to Tarik Cohen for doing that. It's brave, it's difficult, it's vulnerable, it's all the different things that are I think honorable and just like commendable from Tarik Cohen. But it just kind of goes to show you that like, hey, maybe Robert Quinn had more going on in his life too, and it's not just him being washed up or a bad player, because of course we saw this season that maybe there was more going on there, that he could still be great. And so let's remember that these football players are humans, that they're actual people underneath the helmets and not just machines that generate stats for our fantasy football team and gives us wins and losses. They are people too, and people that live very complicated lives and have a lot more things going on besides just having millions of dollars to play a sport that we all enjoy. So again, thePlayersTribune.com, the story is called the Letter to My Younger Self from the Letter to My Younger Self by Tarik Cohen at the Players Tribune. Look it up. It's incredible. Now, didn't mean to have the podcast be that serious and that somber, but I think again, he leaves it feeling optimistic and heartwarming. So I hope that was enjoyable for you, and I hope we got some optimism as well about Fields and these wide receivers, at least coming from the Bears coaching staff. You can be sure any and all developments we get on the offseason for this offense, for Fields, for receivers, we'll break it all down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. later on, it'll either be this week or maybe early next week, we'll talk to our friends from Locked On Tennessee Volunteers about Velus Jones to break down that draft pick in depth. We just did Treston Ebner on yesterday's podcast with Drake Toll from Locked On Baylor, so make sure you listen to that if you have not yet. We'll also touch on some of the post-draft free agents the Bears should be taking a look at, as a few guys have come off the market, and we'll look at also when in this process the Bears might be more inclined to make those free agent additions as the roster evaluation process is ongoing. So plenty to get to all offseason long. I hope you'll keep coming back for more, and I hope that the Locked On Bears podcast makes it a little bit easier for you to bear down.